Michael Collins awoke to the familiar aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Through the half-open bedroom door came the soft sounds of the morning rush. Amanda always got up a half hour early to make breakfast. He used to appreciate these small acts of caring, but lately it was as if an invisible but tangible wall of silence had come between them. Michael got out of bed, pulled on his pants and a t-shirt. Their small apartment on the outskirts of Chicago was furnished simply but cozily. When they'd gotten married 5 years ago, just after Amanda had turned 27 and he'd turned 30, they dreamed of saving up for a house of their own. Now that dream seemed increasingly out of reach. "Good morning," he said, entering the kitchen. Amanda turned, smiling lightly. Her dark hair was in a casual bun, not a trace of makeup on her face. Even in her house robe, she looked attractive. "Coffee's ready? Scrambled eggs in a minute," she said, returning to the stove. Michael sat down at the table, unfolding yesterday's newspaper. His eyes automatically ran over the job ads, though he realized the futility of it. After Jackson & Sons, where he had worked for 8 years, had closed down, it had been impossible to find a place with a decent salary. The big services demanded diplomas, which he didn't have, and the small shops paid pennies. "Are you going to be late for work today?" Michael asked, as Amanda set a plate in front of him. "Yes," she sighed. "Mr. Bennett wants us to review all the policies for the last quarter. Don't expect me before 9. Michael nodded. These conversations were becoming routine. Amanda was staying late at her insurance company more and more often, explaining her increased workload. "I went over the invoices yesterday. We're short on rent again this month," he said without lifting his eyes from the paper. Amanda froze. "Should we borrow money from my mother?" "No," Michael said. "We already borrowed from her 3 months ago. I'll figure something out." Breakfast passed in a long silence. Finishing his eggs, Michael watched Amanda get ready for work, applying light makeup, picking out earrings, brushing her hair. He used to love watching her get ready to go out, but now it was just annoying. He thought she was paying too much attention to her appearance for a normal office day. "I'm off." Amanda kissed him on the cheek. "Don't forget to call about the job opening at Midtown Motors. You said they were looking for a mechanic." "I already did," Michael mumbled. "They need a certified technician." When the door closed behind Amanda, he sat at his desk with a cup of cold coffee. The phone on the desk vibrated, a message from Tony, an old high school buddy. "Still looking for a job? Got a job for one night? Quick money? $1,000 in a couple hours? Give me a call if you're interested." Michael hesitated. Tony had always teetered on the edge of the law. After high school, they'd parted ways because of the dubious ventures he'd been involved in. But now, $1,000 would solve a lot of problems. The rent, the overdue car loan, the electric bill, all of it had piled up in recent months. He set the phone aside without answering. He'd have to look at other options first. By noon, Michael had called 5 more auto repair shops. The same answer: "Sorry, no vacancies," or "Call back in a month." The last place offered him a minimum wage job with no health insurance and a 3-month probationary period. He glanced again at the message from Tony. $1,000 for a couple hours. He and Amanda could pay off their debts and even put some aside. "Where should we meet?" he typed, feeling his mouth dry up. Tony answered instantly. "Joe's Bar, 8 o'clock tonight. The password is Red Cadillac." Michael grinned. Tony always liked over-dramatization, as if he were the hero of a gangster movie. The bar was noisy and smoky. Tony sat in the far corner, sipping a beer. He hadn't changed much since the last time they'd seen him. The same sly eyes, the same gold chains around his neck, just a little more weight. "Mikey!" Tony grinned as Michael approached the table. "It's been a long time." "Hello, Tony," Michael replied discreetly. "What's the job?" Tony looked around and lowered his voice. "It's simple. I need to get a car from point A to point B. No questions asked, no unnecessary conversations. Money on the spot upon delivery." "Is the car stolen?" Michael asked directly. Tony made an offended face. "What do you take me for? Of course not. It's just that, let's just say the owner wants it moved without making a fuss. Paperwork's in order, car's clean." Michael didn't believe a word of it, but need drowned out reason. $1,000, you say? Cash, right after delivery. Tony nodded. Pick up the car at midnight tonight. Deliver it to the address by morning. Clean and simple. What if there's a problem? There won't be a problem, Tony said. I told you, the paperwork's in order. Michael took the sheet of addresses and the car keys. Don't let me down, Tony. When had I ever let you down? He smiled, but his eyes remained cold. At midnight, Michael stood in a deserted parking lot near an abandoned warehouse. The latest model silver Audi looked out of place in the neighborhood. He inspected the car, not a scratch, the interior like new, and a full set of papers in the glove compartment. Maybe it's really clean? Michael thought, starting the engine. He drove out onto the highway, heading for the outskirts of Milwaukee, where he was to hand the car over. The road was deserted, and Michael allowed himself to relax a little. The music was playing softly, and the windshield wipers were wiping the rain off the windshield. For a moment it seemed to him that life was getting better. The red and blue lights of a police car, suddenly flashing in the rearview mirror, shattered the illusion. His heart plummeted. He pulled over to the curb, frantically wondering what to do. The policeman, a short man with a bushy mustache, approached the car at a leisurely pace. Good evening, sir. Car papers, please. Michael held out the papers, trying to stop the trembling in his hands. Is something wrong, officer? Routine inspection, the policeman answered, studying the papers. Do you mind if I check the VIN number? Of course not. The officer walked away to his car, and Michael felt a cold sweat running down his back. A few minutes later, the officer returned, but with a different expression on his face. Sir, step out of the car, please. This Audi has been reported stolen since yesterday. There must be some misunderstanding, Michael began, but stopped when he saw that the officer had his hand on his holster. Step out of the car and keep your hands where I can see them. At the police station, Michael sat in the interview room, looking at the peeling paint on the wall. He called Tony's name, but he seemed to have vanished. There was no answer on his cell phone, no known address. Mr. Collins, Detective Harris, the interrogator, rubbed his eyes tiredly. Your story doesn't add up. You claim you didn't know the car was stolen, yet you met with this Tony at midnight in an abandoned parking lot. Not exactly the most common place for a legitimate transaction, is it? Michael didn't say anything. It looked exactly like he'd agreed to move a stolen car for money. I'll call my wife, he finally said. She'll get a lawyer. Amanda arrived 2 hours later, pale and confused. Her hair, usually neatly styled, now fell haphazardly over her shoulders. She was in her house clothes. She must have rushed out as soon as she got the call. Michael, what's going on? She asked, looking at him through the bars of the temporary cell. I screwed up, he replied simply. I agreed to do business with Tony, to move a car for $1,000. Turns out it was stolen. Tony, the Tony from high school? Her eyes widened in horror. You knew what he was like? I did. Michael lowered his head. But we needed money. For rent. For a loan. Amanda put her hand to her mouth as if to hold back a scream. Jesus, Michael, what were you thinking? Do you realize you could go to jail? I do, he answered quietly. I need a lawyer. The next few days passed like a blur. The public defender, Mr. Johnson, was young and inexperienced. He explained Michael's situation honestly. You have no prior convictions, that's a plus. But you've been caught driving a car that's been reported stolen. It's almost impossible to prove you didn't know about it. What am I looking at? Probation at best. At worst, up to 5 years in prison. The first hearing was a week later. Amanda sat in the front row, pale and gaunt. She had taken time off work to attend the hearing. The prosecutor was ruthless. The defendant was caught red-handed transporting a stolen car worth over $70,000. Although he had no criminal record, the offense was a felony and required appropriate punishment. Mr. Johnson tried to soften the situation by pointing to Michael's impeccable background, his stable work history before the auto shop closed, and the fact that he immediately cooperated with the investigation. The judge, an older woman with a stern look, listened to both sides and announced, "The court takes into account the defendant's lack of criminal record and his cooperation with the investigation. However, the gravity of the offense does not allow for a suspended sentence. Michael Collins is sentenced to 5 years in prison with the possibility of parole after serving 3 years. The courtroom swam before Michael's eyes. 5 years, 1,825 days away from home, from Amanda, from normal life. all because of one stupid decision made out of desperation. Amanda cried as he was led out of the gym. He only had time to shake her hand. "I'll be waiting," she said through her tears. "We'll get through this, Michael. It's not over. I'm sorry," was all he could say. Riverdale Correctional Facility was a 2-hour drive from Chicago. By the standards of the prison system, it was a relatively good place. Medium security, no particularly dangerous criminals. Michael arrived there on a chilly October afternoon with one small bag of personal belongings. The admission procedure was humiliating. Inspection, disinfection, issuance of prison uniforms. But worst of all was the loss of identity. He was no longer Michael Collins, an auto mechanic from Chicago. Now he was just inmate number RL88473. The cell that became his new home was designed for 2. His roommate, a skinny Hispanic man in his 40s, introduced himself as Victor. "A first-timer?" he asked, looking at Michael appraisingly. "Yes," he answered, trying to hide his uncertainty. "How long?" "5 years." Victor whistled. "For what?" "Moving a stolen car." "That's tough. You got caught behind the wheel?" Michael nodded, arranging his few belongings on the narrow bunk. "You got a wife?" "Yeah." "Will she wait?" "She will," Michael answered firmly. Victor grinned, but said nothing. Michael lay awake that first night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the prison, muffled conversations, the footsteps of guards, the clanking of metal doors. He thought about Amanda, about how she was coping on her own. They'd never been apart for longer than a couple days. Now there were years of separation ahead. In the morning, his new life would begin, the life of a prisoner counting down the days to freedom. 5 years seemed like an eternity. But Michael believed Amanda would wait. She promised. And he clung to that promise as the last straw of hope in the sea of despair that consumed his life. The first month at Riverdale dragged on endlessly. Every morning began the same way. The sharp sound of the siren at 6 a.m., roll call, breakfast in the noisy dining room, then work. Because of his experience as a mechanic, Michael was assigned to the prison auto shop. He fixed company cars, sometimes the guards' personal cars. The work helped to pass the time and not to think about what happens outside the prison walls. Victor Rodriguez, his cellmate, was already serving his second sentence, 7 years for drug distribution. He knew all the unwritten rules of prison life and took Michael under his wing. "Never get involved in other people's disputes," Victor admonished him. "Don't borrow money, don't play cards for money, and most importantly, stay away from gangs. They like to recruit new recruits." Michael followed the advice, trying not to attract attention. He wasn't a weakling, but he realized that the smartest survives here, not the strongest. Amanda came every Saturday. The drive took 2 hours one way, but she never complained. Her smile was a ray of light in the dark days of incarceration. "I talked to Mr. Johnson," she reported on her 3rd visit. "He thinks there's a chance of parole in 3 years with good behavior." Michael nodded, looking at her hands. The wedding ring was still in place. "How are you doing? Is everything okay with the money?" "Don't worry." Amanda squeezed his hand. "I got a promotion in the office. I'm assistant account manager now. The pay is higher, but there's more work." A shadow flickered in her eyes that Michael preferred not to notice. "That's great news," he smiled. "I'm so proud of you." Amanda wrote to him regularly, 2 or 3 times a week. She talked about work, the weather, a new show she'd started watching, ordinary, everyday trivia that connected Michael to the world outside the prison walls. "Went to the movies today with Carol and Jan," she wrote in one of her letters. "New romantic comedy with Ryan Gosling. You wouldn't like it, too many sentimental scenes, but we had a lot of fun. Then we went to that Italian place where we celebrated your 30th birthday. I miss our dinners together." Michael reread each letter several times. The paper held the scent of her perfume, and he felt like Amanda was somewhere close by. By the end of the 3rd month of his incarceration, Michael had gotten used to the routine. He had made friends among the prisoners, especially in the machine shop. He even began to be trusted with more complicated repairs, which was a sign of respect. One evening, when he and Victor were playing chess in his cell, the Hispanic asked, "Does your wife still come every week?" "Yes," Michael replied, moving his queen. "Why?" Victor shrugged his shoulders. Impressive. Usually by the third month, the enthusiasm dies down, especially if the wife is young and beautiful. Michael frowned. What do you mean? Nothing in particular. Victor made a move. Just an observation. I saw her picture at your place. Hotties like that rarely stay faithful when their husbands are behind bars for 5 years. Amanda's not like that, Michael replied coldly. Sure. Victor held up his hands in a conciliatory gesture. I'm sorry if I offended you. I've just seen too many stories like that. I'm glad it's different for you. Checkmate. Victor won the game, but the victory seemed bitter to Michael. The seed of doubt had been planted. The next week, Amanda didn't show up. She called to apologize. An urgent project at work. She needed to stay for the weekend. Michael understood, swallowed his disappointment. After all, it was the first time in almost 4 months. The next visit was 2 weeks later. Amanda looked tired but happy. She was wearing a new dress that Michael had never seen before. Simple but obviously expensive. It's a beautiful dress, he remarked. Thank you, she smiled. I thought I'd treat myself. After the promotion, I can afford to do a little shopping. Sure, Michael nodded. You deserve it. The conversation went on as usual. She talked about her work, about her new boss, who was much more demanding than the previous one. So I have to stay late a lot. Sometimes I even take work home with me. You shouldn't exhaust yourself, Michael said softly. Take care of your health. It's all right, she said. I like being busy. It's easier. She didn't finish, but Michael realized, it's easier not to think about you, about being in prison, about what we lost. By the 6th month, Amanda's visits had dwindled to twice a month. She always attributed it to work, and Michael believed it, or wanted to believe it. The letters had gotten shorter and less frequent too. Now they came once a week, sometimes once every 10 days. Instead of detailed accounts of daily life, they were brief reports of the past week, almost in telegraphic style. Your hottie's a little slow on the uptake, Riggs, the big guy who worked in the shop with Michael, remarked one day. She's got a lot of work to do, Michael cut him off. Yeah, work. Riggs made a lewd gesture. Is that what they're calling it now? Michael threw the wrench. Riggs dodged it, laughed. Easy, Collins. Can't you take a joke? There were more and more of these jokes. Older inmates like to tell stories about their wives cheating on them, who heard it from a friend, who caught it themselves after they were released. My Lorraine swore she'd wait, Big Al told me over lunch. When I got out, it turned out she was having her second child with my ex-partner. She said, I'm sorry, Al, but 6 years is too long. Michael tried not to listen to these stories, but they seeped into his mind, poisoning his thoughts. One day in January, well after Christmas, which Amanda had spent with her parents in Detroit, Michael received a strange letter. No return address, no signature. Inside was a photograph. Amanda in a restaurant with a strange man. They're laughing, their hands touching on the table. Nothing compromising, but the look on her face. Michael had never seen such a happy expression since he'd been in prison. He ripped the photo up and threw it away. Anonymous. It's a stupid joke. Someone's trying to get him. Who's the letter from? Victor asked when Michael returned to the cell. I don't know. Some idiot decided to make a joke. Victor looked at him carefully. A picture of his wife with another man? Michael shuddered. How did you know? It's a classic, Victor shrugged. Don't pay attention to it. Half of such photos are fake. Photoshop works wonders now. But the doubt had already penetrated deeper, had taken root. Michael began to remember little things. Amanda's new perfume, an expensive hair clip that hadn't been there before, a passing phrase about a new restaurant that served delicious truffle risotto. They couldn't afford restaurants with truffles before. In February, Amanda came only once. She looked beautiful, fresh haircut, light tan. Had she been to the tanning salon? Michael asked. What? Oh no, she faltered. Just a good night's sleep. He noticed the dainty silver bracelet on her wrist. Definitely new. It's a beautiful bracelet. Thank you. She touched the jewelry absent-mindedly. A birthday present from a coworker. Michael nodded. Amanda's birthday had been 2 weeks ago. He had sent her a hand-drawn card. There was nothing else he could offer. Now that homemade card seemed paltry compared to the silver bracelet. How was work? Michael changed the subject. It's good, she perked up. We've been merged with the legal department. Now we work closely together, a lot of new faces, interesting projects. I'm happy for you, Michael said sincerely. And how are you? Still working in the workshop? For the rest of the visit, they talked about his prison days as if it were small talk about his new job. Amanda looked at her watch more often than usual and left 15 minutes early, citing traffic. When she kissed him goodbye, Michael smelled an unfamiliar perfume scent, not the usual one, more expensive, sophisticated. New perfume? He asked. Yes, she blushed slightly. Do you like it? Very much, Michael lied. In fact, it seemed to him that the scent was creating another invisible wall between them. It was as if Amanda were gradually turning into another person, a stranger. After that visit, there were no letters for 3 weeks. Then came a short note. Sorry I haven't written. Work got in the way. I won't be able to come this weekend. Kisses, eh? Michael reread the note several times. Not even love, just kisses, like an old buddy. Trouble with the wife? Victor asked, noticing his condition. Michael silently held out the note. Victor read it and shook his head. Not good. Maybe she really has a lot of work to do. Maybe. Victor didn't argue. Maybe she doesn't. What do you mean? Victor sat down opposite. Look, Mike, I don't want to pry into your personal life, but this is my second time behind bars, and I've seen a lot of stories like this. At first, they come every week, then once a month, then the letters get shorter, and then, he snapped his fingers. A letter comes, where she lets you go free and wishes you to find your happiness. Michael gritted his teeth. Amanda isn't like that. They're all not like that, Victor objected gently. No one thinks his wife will cheat. But life goes on, Mike. She's young, beautiful, got a promotion, new people, new environment, and here you are behind bars for 5 years. I trust her, Michael said stubbornly. And you should, Victor stood up. But if you want to know for sure, I have friends on the outside. They might be able to keep an eye on her. As friends. Michael wanted to say no, to tell Victor to go to hell with his friends. But something inside him snapped. Maybe it was the anonymous photo. Maybe it was the new perfume and the silver bracelet. Maybe it was the stories of the other prisoners. But the seed of doubt had sprouted and needed to be fed. Just make sure she was all right, Michael said slowly. Nothing more. Victor nodded. Sure. I'll talk to the right people. Amanda didn't show up, didn't call, didn't write. Michael was having a hard time with his work in the workshop, which usually saved him from bad thoughts, wasn't helping now. He made mistakes, snapped at comments, almost fought with Riggs because of a stupid joke. Well, Collins, is the wife busy with work again? He smirked, making an obscene gesture. Michael lunged at him, but they were separated. The workshop manager threatened to transfer Michael to general labor if it happened again. Victor returned with the news 10 days later. My friend Eddie's been watching your Amanda for a while, he said when they were alone in the cell. It wasn't anything serious, just watching from a distance. Michael felt his mouth dry up. Victor pulled some pictures out of the book he was reading. Here, Eddie says it's some lawyer from their firm, James Whitaker or something. Michael took the pictures with trembling hands. The first one showed Amanda leaving the office building in the company of a tall man in an expensive suit. Nothing fancy. Co-workers leaving work. The second showed them getting into an expensive car, clearly not his or Amanda's. The third was of them sitting in a restaurant, with the window showing them clinking glasses. The fourth was taken at the entrance to an apartment building. A man was opening the door. Amanda was standing next to him, laughing at something. This isn't my apartment, Michael said hoarsely. No, Victor confirmed. It's Whitaker's apartment. Eddie checked it out. And your wife? He hesitated. Talk, Michael demanded, even though he already knew the answer. She spent the night there. Eddie saw her come out in the morning, wearing the same dress. Michael closed his eyes. Something inside him felt as if it had been torn away. All his hopes, all his illusions were shattered in an instant. When was that? 3 days ago. Friday? Michael grinned bitterly. The day she was supposed to come to see me. Victor nodded silently. Michael folded the photos neatly and handed them back to Victor. Thanks for the truth. What are you going to do? I don't know, Michael answered honestly. I guess I'll wait for her to tell me. But Amanda didn't. She came back a week later, as if nothing had happened. She talked about work, the new movie she'd seen, how she'd started going to the gym. Michael listened and didn't hear. There were pictures of Amanda and James Whitaker in front of his eyes, glasses of wine, her laughter, his apartment door. You're a little quiet tonight, Amanda said. Is something wrong? No, Michael replied. I'm just tired. As she left, he didn't kiss her goodbye. He just nodded. See you later. He watched her walk across the visitation room, slim, beautiful, in a new dress and a new hairdo. Not at all like the Amanda he knew. Alien. Back in the cell, Michael sat on the bunk and covered his face with his hands. He didn't cry. He just sat there motionless, for hour after hour. Hey, Victor called out in the evening. How are you? I don't know, Michael answered honestly. I don't know. Did she say anything? No. She just acted like she always does, like nothing was going on. Victor sat down next to me. News like this doesn't come easily. She's probably waiting for the right moment. Or she's just not going to say anything. Michael grinned bitterly. Why? I'm here. He's there. She can have it all at once. What are you going to do? Michael was silent for a long time, then raised his head. What can I do? 3 years until possible parole. They'll probably be married by then. Victor was silent again, then said quietly, almost in a whisper, There's another option. What is it? Michael asked indifferently. Escape. Michael stared at his cellmate. Are you kidding? No, Victor replied seriously. Riverdale is not Alcatraz. There are security holes here. I studied them during my first term, but there was no reason for me to run. And now? He's throwing up his hands. I'm looking at 3 more years, and I'm not sure I'll make it to the end. What are you talking about? Victor sighed. I have a heart problem. The doctor says I need surgery, but they won't do it here. It's too expensive for a prisoner, so I have nothing to lose. Michael shook his head. This is crazy. If they catch me, they'll double my sentence. If they get caught, Victor repeated. But I know people who can help you on the outside. New papers, money for the first time. We could get to Mexico, and from there... I can't, Michael interrupted him. It's too much. Think about it. Victor stood up. What's keeping you here? A wife who's sleeping with another man? A job in a prison workshop for a pittance? 3 years before a possible parole that might not be granted? Michael didn't answer. Victor's words hit the mark. That night, he did not sleep a wink. In front of his mind were pictures of Amanda with this James, their laughter, their glasses of wine, the door of his apartment closing behind them. In the morning, as they walked to the dining room, Michael said quietly, I'll think about your proposal. Victor nodded. Take your time. Such decisions are not made overnight. But Michael had already made his decision. He will wait for Amanda's next visit. If she tells the truth, admits to cheating, he'll stay and serve his time properly. If she continues to lie, he'll agree to escape. Amanda didn't come the next week or two. A short letter arrived. Sorry, a lot of work. I'll try to come back next month. Michael crumpled the letter in his fist. So, Victor asked in the evening, what's your answer? Michael looked him straight in the eye. I agree. Tell me your plan. Victor's escape plan was simple and audacious at the same time. Riverdale Correctional Facility, despite its reputation for reliability, had its weaknesses. The main one was the warehouse adjacent to the east wall. Food and household goods were brought there once a month. The guards get careless during unloading, Victor explained, drawing a diagram on a scrap of paper. The entrance gate is open, and everyone is busy hauling boxes. At that moment, you can slip into the back of the car and hide among the empty pallets. And if they find it? Michael asked. There is always a risk, Victor shrugged. But we'll choose the right moment. My friend Eddie will be waiting outside. As soon as the truck leaves the colony, we'll jump out and get into his car. It took 2 weeks to prepare. Victor, through his contacts, figured out the delivery schedule, the truck route, the guard shifts. Michael took care of the little things, collecting food from the mess hall, begging other prisoners for warm clothes, ostensibly to work in the cold part of the workshop. "You'll need documents and money," Victor said one evening. "I've arranged with a man in Chicago. He'll make a new driver's license and social security card. It'll cost $2,000. Do you have that kind of money on the outside?" Michael shook his head. "Only a stash of $900. I hid it for a rainy day and Amanda doesn't know about it." "That's a good start," Victor nodded. "My man can wait with the rest. You're a mechanic. You'll get a job. You'll pay for it." The cherished day came on Wednesday, in the middle of March. Victor received a signal from his contact. "Today is a big delivery. The truck will be parked for at least an hour. Security is minimal." "Ready?" Victor asked as they walked across the yard to the workshop. Michael nodded. Inside, everything was turning over with fear and excitement, but the decision had been made. There was no turning back. During the lunch break, they stealthily separated from the main group of prisoners and, taking advantage of the moment when the guards were distracted by the fight in the mess hall, snuck to the warehouse. A large truck was already there, and workers were unloading crates. "Waiting," Victor whispered, hiding behind a stack of empty pallets. An agonizing 20 minutes passed. Finally, the unloading was over. The truck driver went to sign the documents, and the guard went to the bathroom. "Now," Victor commanded. They quickly slipped into the back of the truck and hid among the empty crates in the far corner. Michael could hear his heart pounding. It seemed as if that pounding was going to give them away. Footsteps were heard, the cab door slammed, the engine rumbled. The truck started up. "Lie still," Victor whispered. "Now there will be a checkpoint, then freedom." At the checkpoint, the car was stopped. Michael heard the guard talking to the driver. Then he heard footsteps. Someone was going around the truck. The hinges of the back door creaked. "Is it empty?" a voice outside asked. "Clear," another answered. "Just empty containers." The door slammed shut, and the truck started again. After a couple more minutes, they felt the truck pick up speed on the highway. "We've done it," Victor exhaled. "Now we wait for the turn at the 80th kilometer. Eddie should pick us up there." Half an hour later, the truck slowed, turning off the highway. Victor cautiously opened the back door and peered out. "I see Eddie. Gray Ford on the right. Get ready to jump when the car slows on the curve." Michael's heart was pounding somewhere in his throat as the truck began to slow down before the sharp curve. Victor opened the door. "Come on!" They jumped to the curb, rolled across the ditch, and rushed to the Ford, its engine already running. Eddie, a short-cropped, burly man with tattoos on his neck, opened the back door for them. "Hurry up, boys! Get in and get down!" The car sped away before they could shut the door. "Clean job," Eddie grinned approvingly, looking in the rearview mirror. No one even noticed. Michael leaned back in his seat, trying to catch his breath. He was free. The unknown lay ahead, but one thing he knew for sure, he needed to get to Chicago. He needed to see Amanda, see her betrayal with his own eyes. "Where to now?" he asked, when the first euphoria of his escape had worn off. "To a friend of mine in Joliet," Eddie answered. "You'll stay there for a couple days, change your appearance, get your papers, then you'll scatter. The farther away from each other, the safer." Michael nodded, looking out the window at the fields rushing by. Freedom tasted of adrenaline and fear. In Joliet, an unremarkable little house on the outskirts of town awaited them, owned by a gruff man named Ray. He silently led the fugitives to the basement, where there were 2 narrow beds, a refrigerator with food, and a tiny bathroom. "Toilets over there," Ray mumbled. "Wipe your feet. No going upstairs, no leaving the house. ID will be here in 2 days." Michael slept for almost 24 hours, feeling relatively safe for the first time in a long time. When he woke up, Victor showed him the morning paper. On the front page was a picture of them under the headline, "Daring Escape from the Riverdale." "They're looking for us now," Victor said. "We'll have to change our appearance." With Ray's help, they had been transformed beyond recognition. Michael shaved off the beard he'd grown in prison, dyed his hair darker, and began wearing thin-rimmed glasses. Victor, on the other hand, let go of his beard and dyed his black hair a light blonde color. On the 3rd day, Ray brought his papers, driver's license, social security cards, even credit cards with a small balance. "You're Daniel Foster now," he told Michael. Born in Ohio, worked as an auto mechanic in Toledo. Memorize these details, they might ask. Michael scrutinized his new ID card. The man in the photograph looked like him, but at the same time subtly different. A more confident look, a different haircut. "What now?" he asked Victor. "Now our paths diverge," he answered. "I'm going to Texas, and from there to Mexico. And you?" "Chicago," Michael said firmly. Victor shook his head. "It's risky. They might recognize you there." "I need to finish something," Michael repeated stubbornly. Victor looked at him carefully. "Is this about your wife?" "Forget it, my friend. She's made her own way." "I just want to make sure," Michael lied. He didn't know what he wanted. To see her? Talk to her? Revenge? They parted ways at the bus station in Joliet. Victor took a bus to St. Louis, and Michael bought a ticket to Chicago. "Be careful," Victor said goodbye. "And don't do anything stupid." Michael nodded, but deep down he knew that that was why he was going to Chicago, to do the biggest stupid thing he'd ever done. Chicago greeted him with drizzle and gray skies. Michael stepped off the bus, pulling his cap over his eyes. The city seemed both familiar and foreign at the same time. It was as if he had returned from a long trip and found that all the streets had shifted slightly, all the buildings slightly changed. He rented a cheap motel room on the outskirts, paying cash a week in advance. The owner, an elderly Vietnamese man, didn't even look at his ID, just the money. On the first day, Michael did not dare to go near his and Amanda's apartment. Instead, he bought a prepaid phone at the nearest store and called the very number where his stash was to be kept. "Auto Pawn Shop Express, how can I help you?" I heard a familiar voice. "Hi, Lou, this is Daniel," Michael said, hesitating. "He's a friend of Mike Collins. He asked me to pick up something from the safe deposit box." There was a pause. "Collins is kind of, unavailable right now," Lou said carefully. "I know. He asked me to help his wife financially. He's got a stash in safety deposit box number 123. The code is his mother's birthday." Lou was clearly hesitant. "You know, buddy, I heard about the Riverdale escape. I don't want any trouble." "It's all clear, Lou," Michael assured him. "I'm just doing what my friend asked me to do." "Okay," Lou finally agreed. "Come back tomorrow morning. But no tricks. I always keep a shotgun under the counter." The next day, Michael received his $900. Lou examined him closely, but didn't seem to recognize him under his new appearance. Michael now had his money and his papers. The only thing left to do was to find Amanda. He started at their old apartment. Arriving there in the afternoon, Michael took up a position in a cafe across the street, from where the entrance to the house was clearly visible. 2 hours passed before he saw a familiar figure. Amanda was coming out of the entryway, but not alone. Next to her was a tall man in an expensive suit, the same James Whittaker from the photographs. Michael's heart clenched painfully. It was one thing to see the pictures, and quite another to see his wife walking with another man, laughing at his jokes, clinging to him. They got into the black Lexus and drove away. Michael followed the car in a cab, keeping his distance. The Lexus brought the couple to an apartment building in an upscale Chicago neighborhood. It wasn't the same building where Michael and Amanda used to live. The security guard at the entrance nodded respectfully to James. He and Amanda walked inside, holding hands as naturally as if they'd done it hundreds of times before. Michael let the cab go and stayed to watch the house. After a few hours, he found the right window. The light was on the 5th floor, and he could see the silhouettes of Amanda and James moving around the apartment. For 3 days, Michael followed them, studying their routines. Amanda and James left in the morning for work, returning in the evening. Sometimes they had dinner at home, sometimes at restaurants. They looked like a normal, happy couple. It was like Michael never existed. On the 4th day, the guard, already used to the strange man who sat for hours on a bench across the street, approached him. "Is everything all right, sir?" Michael gave an embarrassed smile. "Yes, of course. I'm waiting for a girl. First date, a little nervous." The guard smiled understandingly. "She lives in this building?" "Yes, apartment 512. The guard frowned. "Mr. Whittaker lives there. With his fiancée. Fiancée. That word hit Michael under the breath. Amanda had been his wife, and now she was another man's fiancée. "I must have the wrong number," he said quickly. 521, I guess." The guard nodded, but kept looking at Michael suspiciously. He had to leave, so as not to attract unnecessary attention. Friday evening, Michael walked back to the house. He knew that James and Amanda usually stayed home on Fridays. Nestled in the small public garden overlooking their windows, he prepared himself for a long wait. At 8 p.m., the dim lights in the apartment came on. Michael watched as James lit the candles on the table, opened the wine. Amanda came out of the other room wearing an elegant black dress that Michael had never seen before. They sat down to dinner, occasionally reaching across the table to touch each other. Michael sat with his fists clenched so that his nails dug into his palms. Every touch, every smile, every toast was like a stab to the heart. After dinner, they moved to the couch with glasses of wine. James turned on the music and they danced slowly, pressed closely together. Then the kiss, a long, passionate kiss. James's hands slid down Amanda's back, undoing the zipper of her dress. It slid down to her feet. Michael turned away. He was shaking. His head was buzzing and red spots swam before his eyes. All the control he'd maintained these days crumbled under the onslaught of rage and pain. He didn't remember waiting until morning. He didn't remember spending a sleepless night on the bench, shivering with cold and anger. But he clearly saw James leave the house in the morning, get in his car, and drive away. Amanda was left alone. After waiting for the Lexus to disappear around the corner, Michael headed toward the house. He knew that the guard usually went around the property at this time, leaving the post empty for a few minutes. Michael slipped inside and went up to the 5th floor. The door of apartment 512 was in front of him. He rang the bell. A few moments passed before the door opened. Amanda stood before him in a silk robe with a cup of coffee in her hand. Her eyes widened with shock. "Michael?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Jesus, how did you—" "Can I come in?" he asked with feigned calm. Amanda glanced over her shoulder as if looking for support, then stepped back to let him inside. The apartment was spacious and stylish. Expensive furniture, paintings on the walls, a view of the city, not at all like their humble abode. "I heard about the escape," Amanda said as they walked into the living room. "But I didn't think—" "Why are you here, Michael? They're looking for you." "I wanted to see you," he said simply, "to find out the truth." "The truth?" She swallowed nervously. "About you and James, about your relationship." Amanda lowered her eyes. "Michael, I was going to tell you, I didn't know how." "When did it start?" he asked quietly. "Right after I was arrested?" "No," she exclaimed. "I waited for you, I really did. For the first few months I went every week, you remember. But then you met James," Michael finished for her. "Yes," she looked up. "We were working on a project. He was attentive, caring. I was so lonely, Michael. 5 years is a long time. And you decided not to wait." He grinned bitterly. "You decided it would be easier to find a replacement." "It's not a replacement," Amanda objected. "I fell in love with someone else, Michael. It happens." "What about the promises?" he asked, taking a step toward her. "I'll wait. We'll get through this." "Remember those words?" Amanda stepped back. "I truly believed it back then. But life goes on, Michael. I couldn't just stand still for 5 years." "What about me? What do you think I did?" There was anger in his voice. "Do you think it was easy for me behind bars, knowing that you were here, alone?" "Michael, please." She held up her hands in a protective gesture. "I understand that you're upset." "Upset?" he almost screamed. "I've lost everything. My job, my freedom, my home. The only thing I had left was you, your loyalty, your love." "I'm sorry," Amanda said quietly, "but I can't go back in time. James and I are engaged. The wedding is in June." Those words were the last straw. Michael rushed forward and grabbed Amanda by the shoulders. "You're my wife. You're mine. Let me go," she screamed, trying to break free. "You're hurting me." But Michael didn't seem to hear. Amanda and James, their kisses, their embrace on the couch in the very room where they were now. "You slept with him while I was rotting in jail," he hissed, laughing with him, drinking wine, and writing me stupid notes about how a lot of work it was. "Michael, let go!" Amanda lashed out desperately. "I'll scream! Scream!" he shouted. "Who's gonna hear you?" Your James had gone to work and the neighbors weren't home. A look of real fear appeared in her eyes. "What are you going to do?" Michael didn't know the answer to that question himself. He had come to Chicago driven by anger and jealousy, but he had no idea what he would do when he came face to face with Amanda. "Michael, please," Amanda said pleadingly. "Go away. James will be back soon. He forgot his papers." "I'm not going anywhere," Michael said stubbornly. "Not until we figure this out." She suddenly broke free of his grip and ran toward the kitchen. Michael rushed after her. Amanda grabbed the phone, but Michael knocked it out of her hands. "Who are you going to call? Your lover? Michael, calm down." She sounded genuinely terrified. "You're not yourself." She backed toward the kitchen counter where the knife rack stood. Michael noticed the movement and intercepted her arm. "What? Are you trying to kill me? Get rid of me for good?" "Let go!" Amanda jerked and fell awkwardly onto the counter, knocking the stand over. Knives clattered to the floor. Michael bent down and picked up one of them, a large one with a wide blade. "Put the knife down, Michael," Amanda said in a trembling voice. "Please." He stared at the shiny blade as if hypnotized. "Do you know how I felt every day in prison? Like I was being sliced open, every day, every hour, every minute. And now I find out that all this time you've been here with him, happy, carefree. Michael, please." She started toward the door, but he blocked her way. "I loved you, Amanda," Michael said, taking a step forward. "I loved you more than my life." "I loved you too." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "But you committed a crime, Michael. You chose this path, not me." "I did it for us," he screamed. "To pay the rent, your damn bills." "And now what?" she asked quietly. "You gonna kill me? It won't bring back the past, Michael." He stared at her for a long moment. His knife hand trembled. "All I wanted was the truth," he finally said. "I wanted to hear that you were sorry, that you missed me, that you loved." "I missed you," Amanda whispered. "For the first few months, I cried every night. But then, life goes on, Michael." "For you, yes," he grinned bitterly. "For me, it stopped the day I was arrested." At that moment, they heard the sound of the front door opening. "Amanda?" a male voice called out. "I forgot my file folder." Amanda jerked toward the exit, but Michael grabbed her arm. "Don't move." James appeared in the kitchen doorway, tall, well-groomed, wearing an expensive suit. His eyes widened in surprise when he saw Michael with a knife. "What's going on here?" he asked, shifting his gaze from Michael to Amanda. "Who are you?" "I'm her husband," Michael answered. "Her real husband." James paled. "Michael Collins? The one who, escaped from prison, yes," Michael nodded. "Didn't expect this surprise, did you, Jamesy?" Amanda seized the moment and lunged toward James. "Run! He's got a knife!" But James didn't budge. Instead, he stepped forward, covering Amanda with himself. "Look, Mr. Collins, I understand how you feel, but this is not the way. Put the knife down, and we'll talk calmly." "Talk?" Michael grinned. "Talk about what? About how you slept with my wife while I was rotting in jail?" "Michael, please," Amanda pleaded from behind James's shoulder. "Get out before it's too late. We won't call the police if you just walk away. Start a new life." "A new life?" Michael interjected. "Without you? When you marry someone else?" James moved slowly sideways, trying to push Amanda toward the exit. "Mr. Collins, you're making a mistake. Think of the consequences. You're already a fugitive. Don't make it worse." "Shut up!" Michael shouted. "You stole my wife, my life." "No one stole anything," James said firmly. Amanda had made her choice. Michael lunged forward with the knife, aiming for James, but James was quicker. He pushed Amanda aside and dodged the blow by grabbing Michael's wrist. "Run!" he yelled to Amanda. "Call 911." Amanda dashed for the door, but Michael wrenched his arm out of James's grasp and rushed after her. He grabbed her by the hair, yanking her back. Amanda cried out in pain. "Don't touch her!" James stabbed Michael in the back, but as if he didn't feel the pain, he turned around and swung the knife. The blade slashed James in the arm. He jerked back, clutching the wound, which was already dripping blood. "Michael, stop!" Amanda shouted. "You're going to kill him!" "He deserved it," Michael hissed, lunging at James. At that moment, Amanda grabbed a heavy vase from the table and hit Michael over the head. The vase shattered, shards sprinkling to the floor. Michael staggered but stayed on his feet. Slowly, he turned to Amanda, his eyes blazing with unconcealed rage. "Are you protecting him?" he hissed. "Him and not me! Michael, please!" She backed away until her back was against the wall. It all happened in an instant. Michael lunged forward with the knife. James tried to intercept him, but he slipped on the shards of the vase. The blade entered Amanda's stomach. Time seemed to stop. Michael watched Amanda's eyes widen with shock as a red stain blurred on the fabric. She slowly slid down the wall, leaving a trail of blood. "No," Michael whispered, releasing the knife. "No. Amanda, no." He knelt down beside her, trying to cover the wound with his hands, but the blood continued to flow between his fingers. "Amanda, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to," he mumbled. "Hold on, we'll call an ambulance." But it was too late. The life was leaving her eyes. With a last effort, Amanda raised her hand and touched his face. "Sss." The hand fell lifelessly. James watched the scene with horror, holding the phone to his ear. Murder. Apartment 512, Lakeside Towers. Michael didn't hear him. He sat cradling Amanda's body, looking into her glassy eyes. He didn't try to run, didn't try to hide. It was over. The police arrived 7 minutes later, 2 squad cars and a plainclothes detective. They entered the apartment with guns at the ready, but met no resistance. Michael was sitting on the floor, covered in blood, holding Amanda's body. "Hands up!" the officer commanded. "Stand up slowly and step away from the body." Michael looked up, blank, lifeless. "I killed her," he whispered. "I killed Amanda." Detective Frank Donovan, an older man with graying temples and tired eyes, stepped closer. "Michael Collins?" he asked, even though he already knew the answer. The pictures of the Riverdale fugitive were all over the news. Michael nodded. "You have the right to remain silent," the detective began, as the officers carefully pulled Michael away from the body and cuffed him. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Michael wasn't listening. His gaze was fixed on Amanda, pale, motionless, with a frozen expression of surprise on her face. At the police station, Detective Donovan personally questioned Michael. He sat in handcuffs, unconcerned with everything that was going on. "Why did you run away from Riverdale, Mr. Collins?" the detective asked. "I wanted to see my wife," Michael answered monotonously. "Were you planning to kill her?" Michael shook his head. "I don't know what I was planning. I wanted to make sure she was cheating. I wanted to make her sorry, to make her repent. But you brought a knife with you." "No," Michael looked up. "The knife was in the kitchen. Her knife. Our knife." The detective was making notes in his notebook. "Tell me what happened." Michael told everything. The escape, the stakeout, the confrontation. He spoke in a steady voice, as if he were retelling someone else's story, not the events that had turned his life upside down. "I didn't mean to kill her," he said at the end. It was an accident." "Accidental?" The detective raised an eyebrow. "You stalked her, threatened her with a knife, attacked her fiancé?" "All I wanted was the truth," Michael repeated stubbornly. "And what is the truth, Mr. Collins?" Michael was silent for a long moment, then looked up at the detective. "The truth is that I've already served time for my crime. Now she's served hers." Detective Donovan leaned back in his chair, studying the man sitting before him. In his 25-year career, he'd seen a lot of killers, but rarely had he seen such cold, calculating calm. "You are unrepentant." It was not a question, but a statement. "I do repent," Michael countered. "But not for coming to her. I regret meeting Amanda in the first place, for believing in love, in loyalty, in 'till death do us part.'" He held up his cuffed hands. "Now death do us part. All's fair, isn't it, detective?" Frank Donovan closed his notebook and stood up. "You will be charged with escape from custody, trespassing, assaulting Mr. Whitaker, and first-degree murder. You face life in prison, possibly the death penalty." Michael shrugged indifferently. "What difference does it make? My life ended the moment the blade entered her body." The detective headed for the door, but turned around at the threshold. "You know, Mr. Collins, I've been catching criminals for years. And you know what I've noticed? The real tragedy isn't that people make mistakes. The tragedy is that they let those mistakes shape the rest of their lives. You could have started over after prison. You could have let Amanda go, wished her happiness. Instead, you chose revenge. And now there's no future for you or her. The detective walked out, closing the door behind him. Michael was left alone in the empty interrogation room, with handcuffs on his wrists and his wife's blood on his hands. He closed his eyes, and Amanda's face reappeared before his inner gaze. Not the dead, frozen face, but the living, laughing face it had been in the best days of their marriage. "I'll wait," she'd said then in the courtroom. And she didn't wait. Now he had to wait. Long, endless years behind bars, with the ghost of his murdered love haunting him until his death.